What is up, everybody? We are back. Few weeks off on the pod. Had to put some final touches on the college football preview stuff. And now it is July. We are here. We're going to talk some college football. We start with the Big Ten. And we had to bring on the guy we had last year to preview the conference and one of the best guys in the space to follow for college football betting, for college football fantasy. He's, of course, Chris Moxley at Chris Moxley 19 from campus to Canton. That's with the number 2. Chris, thanks for coming on. Second straight year. How's it going?
It's going well. I'm excited to get into it. I've recently wrapped up the majority of my college football, preseason stuff. Still a little bit to go, but I'm feeling good. I really like the way that my stuff is shaping up this year, and I think that 2024 could be a really, really strong season. So I'm excited.
Yeah, and a lot of it feels like every year it's the same thing now with college football, but a lot of things on the move. I think this year maybe more so than the past, with the Pac-12 ceasing to exist outside of Washington State and Oregon State, and we go to the Big Ten, and you welcome in Oregon, USC, UCLA, Washington. So before we do team by team breakdown, Chris, let's just do big picture macro take. Are you going into the season with anything in your head, like I want to really attack the travel angles for some of these teams going West Coast to East Coast? Do I want maybe the difference in play? Because you think about the Pac-12, a lot, especially recently, a lot more pass-heavy offenses, maybe a little bit more explosive. The Big Ten, pretty stark difference in terms of a lot of ground-based teams, maybe less outside talent at the wide receiver spot. Is there anything talking Big Ten with the new teams coming in that you're maybe eyeing?
Yeah, I think travel is a good point, right? Like, we have a game between UCLA and Rutgers this year that UCLA has to go all the way across the country for. And I don't anticipate that being an easy travel day for them. So yeah, there's a ton of those opportunities. I think playing in cold weather is going to be interesting for some of these teams. Like, what's it going to be like when you play in Wisconsin and you're USC or UCLA and you're not used to it? I think of all the teams, Oregon is certainly set up to be the most well-adjusted. Their style just fits kind of what the Big Ten is trying to do, and Dan Lanning has that SEC experience, so he knows what it takes to compete in the big conference. I don't know how the other teams are going to fare. I'm pretty sure it's going to be a major adjustment for them. Personnel-wise, scheme-wise, travel-wise. Like, the Pac-12 was a pretty, in general, isolated conference in terms of where all the schools were located. So you didn't have huge travel days, right? Or weeks. Now you do. And I think it's going to be pretty tough for some of these schools.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And to that point, you bring up Oregon, and USC doesn't fall into this, and they made some defensive change, and we're going to talk about that. But teams like UCLA and Washington, they brought in new coaches, and I would say both Chip Kelly, maybe not, but Washington for sure. Maybe a surprise, like Kalen DeBoer, people knew that he would be in the mix, but obviously Alabama opens after the season, and that all got away from Washington. Washington jumps to the Big Ten with a whole new coaching staff on a bit of short notice, a max exodus from the national championship run. I think they're even more so set up to really be like Oregon has the continuity thing. USC, they have Lincoln Riley. They have something going for it. UCLA and Washington, it's almost like this is like a year zero, and it's not any easier that you're bringing in a whole new coaching staff to make this, like we just said, pretty seismic jump in terms of travel, scheme, personnel, the style of fit that these other teams are playing in your conference that you're seeing most of the time. I think it's maybe an underrated jump, and we're going to talk about some of these win totals and certain things. I think some teams are kind of got hosed with their schedule and screwed. I mean, to me, UCLA, arguably, all things considered, most difficult schedule in the country when you talk about just pure travel. So I think it's a very good point. I think we'll see. Let's start. So I don't have Oregon first. We'll do Ohio State first. I thought we'd go kind of in like the contender down, and we can start there, maybe go a little bit longer on some of the teams that might be a little bit more impactful to this all. So let's start Ohio State. Win total's 10.5. Pretty much, wherever you look, it's around like even to the over, minus 120 to the under. They are the clear favorites in the Big Ten. They're about 155 at FanDuel. So, Chris, I'll start here. Last year, everyone talked about Ohio State. The defense took a big jump forward. Then Marvin Harrison Jr. Running back room was rock solid, even with some injuries. but it was Kyle McCord wasn't good enough to really get them over the hump to play at the Michigan, even the Georgia level to really be a national championship contender. McCord's gone. It's Will Howard now, we think. Is this Ohio State offense going to be ready to go, replacing Marvin Harrison Jr.? They get Quinshon Judkins. How do you view this Ohio State offense from not just Big Ten? Are they going to win games? But if you want to throw in some of your fantasy expertise as well, please feel free.
Yeah, do we think that Will Howard is actually an upgrade over Kyle McCord? Because I'm not convinced he is, if I'm being totally honest.
I would say his floor is higher, but I don't know if his ceiling is that much higher.
Interesting. I might view it the other way around, because I think you're going to know. I think you knew what you had in Kyle McCord where he was limited. Like Will Howard is going to get the benefit of the Chip Kelly scheme and how well he works with rushing quarterbacks and two really, really good running backs. So I think it's probably a net positive, but I don't think it's a crazy upgrade. Like if I was Ohio State, I certainly would have been shopping in bigger markets than the Will Howards of the world. Offensively, I think we're going to see a step back from the passing rate, like just in general, neutral game script. I expect that to come down significantly. Like they're always pretty high up there, but that's like Ryan Day's influence. I think we're going to see a lot more of the ground and pound, and I think that's what they want to do. You don't bring in Quinshon Judkins unless that's really your goal. So you have two backs that I think are going to be on the field a bunch. The wide receiver room is good. It's not, they have Emeka Egbuka is probably the first round pick. Cardinal Tate is. So it's there's a reason they're the number one team in the country in my power rankings, right? They're really good. They're going to be a different scheme, but they're still a really darn good team.
Yeah, I think your point on Judkins as the big transfer get in terms of like skill positions and everything, I think that signals to me that they want to lean into that run game. Like you mentioned, Will Howard with his legs. It felt like Ohio State, they didn't have the passing game really work. It's Ohio State, so let's just adjust they were obviously still elite, but it didn't feel like they gave McCord the full reins. And it felt like they were almost sometimes up against it. It's like, just chuck it at Marvin Harrison and have him make a play. I think they want to be it works. Again, it works, but we're talking like national title. You got Oregon on their heels here, Penn State, Michigan. Like they want to be a cut above. I think they want to lean to the ground game, and them getting Judkins to me signaled we do not want Henderson getting hurt again. We want to have him on a pitch count, keep him as fresh as possible, mixing him and Judkins. Will Howard is a capable runner, a pretty solid passer, I would say, underneath especially. He can get the ball, I wouldn't say downfield all that much, but to me, I think I see the vision with the offense, and I think Ryan Day, this is more me trying to view it. I think he had enough of Ohio State getting pushed around on offense, and by Michigan especially, and he wants to almost say, all right, now we're doing the bullying. This is our time now to really push you around. The offensive line was damn near elite last season. It wasn't perfect against Michigan, but it was pretty good. They bring back 4 of their starters. They get the transfer McLaughlin from Alabama, who I think is more infamously known, but he's still a blue chip SEC prospect. So I think they want to lean into that ground game. And losing Marvin Harrison Jr., maybe they do need to adjust a little bit their expectations of the passing game. So I like what they did on offense. I still think the floor is top 5, top 3. The ceiling, I don't know if the ceiling is number 1 though, like we have been accustomed to in the past.
Yeah, I have them power ranked as my number 1 team currently. Just roster, not accounting for their schedule, straight up. I just think this team is there is not in my opinion, a true weakness outside of quarterback, because I have a lot of questions there, but I'm not sure it's going to matter because we're talking about how they want to run this offense.
Mm-hmm.
They have 3 games that I look at and I say, okay, they have to win 2 of these at least to probably win the Big Ten. And I would be surprised if they missed the playoff. I just don't see them losing all three.
Yeah.
And that's Oregon, Penn State, Michigan.
Yep. 2 are on the road, which I guess it's not like the perfect cookie cutter schedule that some of these teams have been accustomed to in the Big Ten, but I think those are kind of going away. But I agree with you on my notes here. It's schedule isn't a joke. At Oregon, at Penn State, in 2-1, you're fine. Go.
What I do think is interesting though is that Oregon game is a tough spot because that's right after Iowa, and you get Iowa at home, but you do really want to get into the trenches with Iowa and then go fly out to Eugene? Probably not. That's just the schedule and the way that the Big Ten is set up now. So I currently have Ohio State favored in that game, but it's a legit toss up.
Yeah,
I don't know where I'm going with that at the end of the day. Do get Michigan at home, which is nice. So yeah, there's just a lot of questions about what that Oregon game means for them, in my opinion. I think that's going to be the most pivotal game in their schedule.
100%, and that's the early. These are the 2 top teams. I don't think anyone really argues that those are the 2 top teams in the conference. I will say my preseason rating, and I've noticed this over years, so maybe this is a blind spot in how I generate my power ratings. I've had Georgia 2 the last 2 years, which I don't necessarily believe in, but that's just the number. And then this year I have Ohio State as the number 1 team preseason, which I think makes sense given the talent coming in, the returning production on defense, which we haven't even discussed yet. So it makes sense that Ohio State enters as the number 1 team in the preseason. Before we talk about Oregon, I do want to talk about this defense, though, because I think last year became the backbone of the team, and I think it's going to be that again, looking at what they got. I mean, they bring in Caleb Downs from Alabama, Tuamali Loto's back, Sawyer's back. So are you basically projecting this defense is just as good as it was last year, or are there maybe a blind spot here for the Ohio State defense?
I mean, if there's a blind spot, maybe it's linebacker. They don't have a lot of experience at that position. I think they only have 16. Yeah, they only have 16 starts between the 2 projected starters, so that's a little bit of a concern for me. But I mean, the front is so good, and they returned Denzel Burke too on the back end. It's just stars everywhere on this team. I look at the schedule and I say, what offense is going to be able to put up points against this defense? And the answer is maybe 1 or 2. And the defense was excellent last year, right? I mean, one of the best in the country, and you don't lose anybody to the NFL that is really going to hurt you or that you couldn't replace, right? So, yeah. I mean, they were top 5 in basically every advanced metric you want to look at, points per opportunity, EPA per play. They limited explosives, and they were limiting down-to-down success. So this is a really well-coached unit too. I mean, you see the hire of Jim Knowles paying off in year 2, 3, and beyond.
Yeah, no, 100%. And we saw in year 1, Knowles, the big Michigan game, get the top taken off, and then they adjust by bolstering their secondary even more. And I mean, the defense was absolutely nails last year. And I agree with you. I don't necessarily know anyone on the schedule besides Oregon. Maybe Penn State on the road can give them some trouble, but I think for the most part, I mean, you really look at last year, Michigan, who wanted to play bully ball and run you over. In the game, they had a negative EPA per rush. So Ohio State's defense was absolutely fantastic last season. So I will say also just another scheduling note, if this even matters, because they're going to be a 1,000,000-point favorites in these games. They're home 5 of their last 6. They close in Columbus. So they're rarely traveling much. So I think that's an interesting point. I do want to loop it into this. So you mentioned Oregon. You would have Ohio State favored over Oregon. It's not gospel, but the game of the year market at DraftKings has Ohio State as a 1-point favorite in Eugene. I think when we're talking the big picture, I think I like Oregon more than Ohio State. I think that's going to be one of my flag plants when we're talking win the Big Ten, playoff run, Heisman discussion things. I think Oregon, that might be my team. So that was going to be the first thing I wanted to pose to you. Where do you, because again, preseason, you have Ohio State number 1, right? I understand the talents there and everything. But then when you really, once your priors have to start adjusting to what's actually going on the field, I think Oregon might be set up to be the second best team to Georgia, in my opinion.
And I think that's fair, right? I have Ohio State favored by half a point in that game, but I mean it is home in Eugene, so right, like you take the um that number into account too. So on the neutral site, I have Ohio State about like 2.5. Um, yeah, I think they have the better quarterback. I think their offense is just as good in terms of skill position players. Maybe not at running back, but at receiver. Like there, you cannot either outcome, Oregon or Ohio State winning this conference would not shock me at all. Like
Yeah.
I don't think I can conclusively tell you I feel so confident in either team. They're both are top three in my power rankings. Georgia's two, Oregon's three. So these are just two of the like juggernauts.
Yeah, and that's why I don't think it's like the hottest take that I think Oregon's going to end the season better than Ohio State. It's more how I project the upside. If you pull up Dylan Gabriel's PFF and you pull up Bo Nix's PFF from last year, like the two of them compared, they're basically the same thing. And are we
Absolutely.
sure? Are like they're green in the same spots, they're yellow in the same spots. They have similar accuracy tendencies where they're really accurate underneath. The deep ball isn't necessarily a proponent of their offense, but they're super, super effective when it's intermediate and short throws. Gabriel, maybe there's some durability concerns, but I mean the guy has been through everywhere at this point. When he's on the field, he's super effective. Is he better? Is he a better college quarterback than Bo Nix? Does he have more of an upside than Bo Nix? I mean, I know he was third place in the Heisman voting last year, but I think a lot of people attributed that to like scheme and that like he executed at a high level more than Bo
Oh yeah.
Nix is really good. Like, is Dylan Gabriel more talented?
I think you could make that case, right? He doesn't have the physical attributes that Bo Nix does. That's the difference between
Yeah,
the two. But that's not going to matter when you're running this Will Stein offense, which is like his arm is what holds Dylan Gabriel back from being an NFL quarterback. That's not going to matter
yeah,
when you're running
exactly.
this Oregon offense, right? So yeah, and the big difference between Oregon and Ohio State for me, when we're talking down the stretch and potential
Mm-hmm.
injuries and like getting beat up, I feel way better about having Dante Moore and Austin Novosad behind Dylan Gabriel than I do having Devin Brown, probably Julian Sayin, Aaron Nolan, Link Kineholz. Like, I don't really feel great about either of those guys, but I've seen
Yeah,
Dante Moore play. I know Dante Moore can play football it wasn't great last year, but like, I don't think you need to be great to run this offense either. So
yeah,
I like the depth behind Gabriel, and Gabriel, like, he gets banged up. So does
yeah.
Will
No,
Howard.
100%. And I mean, you look at where. So let's keep going. Oregon here. They lose Bucky Irving, but we know Jordan James can play. I mean, he was like part of the offense last year. He was very involved in the offense, so we know he can play. Offense. Tez Johnson, stud. And you bring in Evan Stewart, who I think might be a little bit more of like the idea of Evan Stewart. But again, when you're running this type of offense, like the sky's the limit here. I mean, now you're talking, can Oregon's wide receiver room keep up with Ohio State's wide receiver room?
I mean, I don't know what Jeremiah Smith is going to do this year. So, like, that's the big question mark.
Yeah, I guess they have a higher, like,
They
untapped.
probably have a
We
higher
don't.
ceiling. Yeah.
Yeah,
But, like, I think Evan Stewart's a player. Like, I think he's
yeah,
really good. Just haven't seen him, like, consistently be that. I think part of that is injury. Part of that is the offense and the injuries to Connor Wegman last year. But Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson is like, that's an upgrade over Troy Franklin. Like, I think he's a better player
yeah,
than Troy Franklin is.
yeah,
So I think this offense only got better. Like, I don't think this offense took a step back. And the tight end they have, not Ferguson, but Sadiq behind him, like, I think he's going to get some run this year too. And like, he's another playmaker that's super athletic and with the ball in his hands. So like, it's a really, really good offense. And I would argue it's just as good as last year, if not better. Because I like Jordan James. He just isn't quite the pass catcher that Irving is, but I think he's a better rusher.
yeah. And I mean, you look at offensive line; they were amazing last year. They bring back 4 starters. And from like a fantasy perspective, are you targeting this Oregon offense anyway? Is there like there's guys you're like gotta be in on, or like do you, like to me? I'm looking Tez Johnson like some award markets, not necessarily like all over the place, but like can Tez Johnson be taking home some hardware by the end of this year? Like that's how I'm thinking. He's not gonna be the favorite, but he's gonna be right there. Not
Yeah.
Heisman, obviously, but
Tez, sure. Tez Johnson Evan Stewart, Dylan Gabriel I do a lot of best ball fantasy drafts. All three go within the first 25 picks. So and
Yeah.
then James like pretty close after. So this is a really, really like we're very aggressive in targeting these players in fantasy. Um, it's just such a good unit. I just have so much faith in what Will Stein's doing there as offense coordinator that like it's just plug and play. It doesn't really matter who is under center or at receiver. I don't think it was a joke last year that like Tez and Bo Nix have like this close connection because they're brothers, and I don't think that's going to matter. Like he did target him a lot, but like Tez Johnson's just like a freaky 155-pound soaking wet speedster who can basically outrun anybody in the secondary. Like
Yeah.
he's just a special player. It doesn't matter who's under center. He's just going to get the ball.
Yeah. And I think to me, what elevates Oregon to make me more bullish about them is the moves they made on defense, especially in the portal. And I mean, you bring in Jabbar Muhammad from Washington, Kobe Savage from Kansas State, Gladwell from Houston on the defensive line. I thought the defense last year was obviously very good, but it felt more that it didn't match my eye. The numbers didn't match my eye test. They obviously they were more talented than a lot of teams that they played, but didn't feel like if they were to make the playoff, they were going to really put the screws on a team and really go on a run. Obviously, that was a 14 playoff. Now we're talking about a 12-team playoff. I think this defense has the ability, especially in the secondary, to shut down some teams. Like I wasn't as confident last year. So I think that's where I see why I project higher or more highly on Oregon versus Ohio State is the adjustments they made on defense. I think they got better. And Ohio State, I don't know if they necessarily solved some of their underlying issues that plagued them last year, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And I largely agree with the additions they made in the portal, right? Like they probably added 30 starters in the secondary. Like they're all like all conference level athletes. I don't have a lot of concern about the secondary. Um, again, I don't really know what the front seven is totally going to look like. I mean, I'm confident in Jordan Birch. I like Caldwell. I don't know what the linebackers are going to look like. I think that's an important position in the Big Ten, though, like to get right.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's not that they're a bad unit or anything. I just not a lot of experience there, so I don't know exactly what to think of this unit. Same thing about Ohio State, right? Like we just don't have a lot of starting experience, and so what that means, it might not be anything, right? Like you had guys who were playing like 30% of snaps last year, so they were getting in, but are they ready to take a step? I don't know. Like that's the worst position unit grade on Oregon for me.
Fair. So looking at their schedule, it's a weird one because they play 8 games in a row. They play 3 by 8 games by Washington. So it is tricky, no doubt about it. They end up getting Michigan in a really weird spot because they play 2 Friday games. And for those listening on podcasts, this might sound confusing, but they host Ohio State. They play at Purdue on the following Friday. They're back in Eugene for Illinois, and it's at Michigan before they play 2 other games with a home road again. So it's a tricky setup. I will say, though, playing Purdue on a Friday night in West Lafayette, given the state of Purdue, I don't think is going to be that difficult, but there will be some body blows. Why this can pay off for Oregon, though, is very interesting. So they get their second bye in week 13. They play Washington at home. The following week is going to be the Big Ten championship game, which I think, Chris, based on how we're speaking, we're both fairly confident they will be in. We could say with some sort of confidence they will be in. So it's just one game. They can be as fresh as humanly possible because they're only playing one game. Whereas if it's Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game and that's their opponent, they come in playing 6 straight games. So there is no bye there. So I do think if you're talking Big Ten future, I think you need to look at the upside of Oregon. Again, we're splitting hairs. They're like 2-1, but that's like where my mind is at here. Any thoughts here on the Oregon schedule?
Yeah, no, that's a good point, right? And if you had to pick 2 teams to play before Michigan, one of them would certainly be Purdue, maybe the other one Northwestern. Although I don't think so highly of this Illinois team either. Like that's not a bad run after Ohio State to go to Michigan. Like, obviously, you don't want to play.
It's more just like the in the body blows and like a build up over time.
Yeah, like it's not a. I mean, they don't have a particularly difficult schedule, generally speaking. Like
Yeah.
Oregon is not a. Obviously, you get Michigan and Ohio State, right? But like outside of that, you're really not getting the tougher teams in the conference, and your your out of conference schedules: Idaho, Boise State, Oregon State.
Yeah.
Boise State's pretty good, but like Oregon should easily handle them. So Idaho is a subpar FCS program, and Oregon State is kind of languishing. So it's really not a difficult schedule. Like you, outside of that Ohio State game, you're not really playing a lot of physical teams early either, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in on the Ducks. Before we move on to the rest of the teams, Gabriel Heisman.
I mean, you could easily make the case, right? It's the same case that Bo Nix had last year that got him to New York City, right? Like, it's the exact same case.
They lost 2 games as what? What were they? They in Washington. They were what, a small favorite, maybe something like that.
They were a field goal favorite.
Yeah. Okay. So they were a road favorite, and then they were what? Like a 7.5 point favorite in Vegas, and they win both or at least one. He maybe wins the award. He was the betting favorite before the end of it. So I don't know. I'm sifting through Heisman is interesting. I lean towards Bo Nix. My dog is agreeing with me as he barks.
That was a strong endorsement too.
That Winston's in on Gabriel Heisman for sure.
Yeah, I mean, what is he, third currently in odds, depending where you look?
Yeah, and you're not like the Oregon quarterback transfer veteran. It's not anything, but like, can't you make the same? Again, you said Bo Nix, but even like Jane Daniels, guy who goes to a really offense for him and he pops off, and if Oregon runs the table, which is possible with their schedule, he has the marquee wins. You put up Bo Nix's stat line, like, aren't you at least a finalist?
Is there another player on the team that is going to steal votes from him? Because I think the answer is probably no.
No,
assuming that one receiver doesn't like totally dominate, and I don't.
And I don't even think it would be more system than anything, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, you don't have to worry about competing with another player on the team to like steal votes from, and I that isn't totally true of a lot of other top teams in the country. Like, there's at least one other player who's impacted, and I just don't think that's true for Oregon. Even though I like Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson a lot.
Yeah, it's Heisman, just like a different kind of conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, so let's do Penn State now. Win total 9.5, -172 to the over at FanDuel. They're 5-1 to win the conference. They return a bunch of key guys on the offense, particularly Drew Aller, Katron Allen, Nick Singleton. They make some changes. Offensive line loses a third guy in 2 years to the NFL draft. They hit the portal pretty hard. But the biggest news is obviously that they hire Andy Koltanecki from Kansas. So, Chris, how do you project this offense?
I could say I don't know, because I really don't know what James Franklin is going to tell Koltanecki what he can and can't do. But it will certainly be more aggressive downfield than it was last year, which was essentially non-existent. I like Drew Aller, the player. I think there is a good quarterback somewhere inside Drew Aller.
Oh, for sure.
He's got the physical tools. We comped him to Josh Allen coming out. And like, I don't think that's a bad comp, but we have not seen him put it together yet. And I think he's a much better rusher than they used him as last year. And I think he doesn't get credit for that part of his game. However, I don't know that Koltanecki will be able to do his thing in totality. And that's what concerns me on offense. And I don't like their wide receivers either. So where is this production coming from? Is it going to be Drew Aller playing hero ball plus the running backs? I don't think anything of Julian. No, I don't think anything. Like, I don't think Julian Fleming is some impact wide receiver. Like, he's probably a wide receiver 2 or 3 on a really good team.
Yeah.
So I just don't like the skill, like the weapons in the passing game all that much. I like Tyler Warren at tight end, but like, that's not really a ringing endorsement when your best player on one of the best teams in the country is a tight end. Like, unless you're Brock Bowers, of course. Maybe Colson Loveland. But I don't know what this offense is going to be like. I expect to be more aggressive, but I don't know to what degree.
So last year, Penn State, which the numbers are ridiculous, but 115th in explosive rush rate, 123rd in explosive pass rate.
Yeah.
Kansas, to that matter, top 40 in both of those. And I mean, they were playing a third-string quarterback at times. So I guess where I'm at, I don't have a strong case. I don't have a strong stance on Penn State, whether it's like, I'm like way in or I'm way out. I kind of like got to see it, see if, like you said, Colton Ecke's like able to kind of run the offense as needed or if the weapons are there. But I will say that you got to take some more shots downfield. I mean, Aller, you look at his PFF last year. I mean, 9% of his throws were 20 yards or more. Like that's got to be closer to double for a guy with a big arm too. Maybe the weapons aren't there, but you got to take some shots more. I agree with you. I'm not sure where the weapons are, but I mean, Kansas last year, they had explosive weapons, but I wouldn't say they were like the most talented bunch. And there were guys running wide open. So you think that they'd be able to at least scheme up a few deep shots throughout the game. Like the game plan should be there. There should be more of a thesis with this team.
It will not be as bad as it was last year in terms of hitting explosives. I find it really hard to believe. And
like they have to, like even if it's like below average, but like 30 spots up, like the floor is just so low.
Exactly. The one thing that I wonder, and I don't think they ever came out and said anything about this, but I had heard a couple times that Nick Singleton was hurt a lot of last year. I think a healthy Nick Singleton is a really dynamic player for this offense, and we did not see that last year. We saw a player who was not breaking big runs like he was as a true freshman. If we get that version of Nick Singleton, I think that opens up a lot for the offense because they just like Katron Allen's just not that guy. Katron Allen is like get you 5 or 6 yards, like a really good rush, but he just isn't that explosive. I think if you get Singleton like really hitting explosives often, you're going to open up a lot more of the passing game because defenses just didn't have to play it that way last year.
Yeah, I agree with that. And so based on how I'm viewing how you think this team is still going to lean on its defense, right? Is that how you see this Penn State team, or they're going to need to?
They're gonna. I think they're gonna have to just because I don't trust the receivers. Like you're Penn State, you can't get a better option in the portal than Julian Fleming. I just that flummoxes me. The same way Ohio State can't get a better option than Will Howard. You are the top dogs in like the country. You can't do better than that. I don't know. Like I think they'll have to rely on their defense, but that's always kind of been Penn State, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious what this defense looks like though this year. I don't know how much of the scheme will change with Manny Diaz leaving. So, but I mean, I like a lot of the players on this team. Like Abdul Carter's like freaky. So
yeah. I mean, defense going to look pretty similar. They do lose Chop Robinson, but they bring back. They have plenty of depth there. I believe they bring back like after Chop, they have like their next like 6 guys all back. Secondary lose a lot, but they have guys stepping up into roles. The depth is there. I mean, Penn State, one of them better now, like levels to this, where like they're recruiting well and they're building it up, and then they take over, and then they go to the pros and they have the next level up. So I'd say the question is more top end, like when we're talking playoff. But in terms of depth, I think they can handle the blows of a full season and not see too much of a drop off. Tom Allen, think what you want versus Manny Diaz, but I don't think there's something crazy going on in terms of that. Tom Allen's familiar with, the defensive minded coach. I think the defense.
yeah, that defense from last season was crazy good, just productivity wise. Top 3 in like EPA per play on with both rush and the pass. It's a good team.
So I do think we see Penn State maybe take a step back, but still inside like that top 5. In terms of the schedule, Chris, what do you see here? They do open at West Virginia.
Yeah, so I have them favored in 11 of their 12 games.
I agree.
And I'm trying to find where that second or third loss comes from because like I don't think they're beating Ohio State, but
no,
it's a really easy schedule. They avoid both Oregon and Michigan. Like what's the next toughest game for them? Is it USC? Maybe.
Yeah, but then look at the context of going to USC. They're home for Kent State, Illinois, and UCLA, and then they go to USC before they hit their bye. But that's the game I had circled. Besides that, even at Wisconsin, I mean, you're flirting with like a, what, 6-point favorite? I mean, I could look up what I have, but probably more.
Yeah, I have it almost 7 on the dot. But
Uh-huh.
and that they're coming out of their bye week too, right? So like it's not a bad setup, and it's not like any of the teams you're playing earlier are physical teams, maybe except Illinois, just as like that's the way they play. So yeah, I have a really tough time with this Penn State team because I don't think they're in the upper echelon of like legit title contenders. Their schedule is so good that they're going to win at least like 10 games.
Yeah, I remember we did the pod last year, the Big Ten preview, and I said, I was like, Penn State win total is 9.5. They play Ohio State and Michigan. They're probably going to lose both, and they're going to win every other game, and they're going to win 10 games, and then that's your schedule. I mean, you look at it again. I mean, the win total is shade towards it's minus 172 to the over, so it's not like I'm like finding a crazy bet here, but it's kind of tough for them to lose outside Ohio State, to lose 2 other games on their schedule, given what it is. They're minus 142 to make the playoff. Let's say they go 10-2. Are they in? 10-2, and they don't make the Big Ten championship game.
Yeah, that's the question, right?
They're third,
probably.
so they don't even like. Yeah, I mean, and everyone will say how bad they are.
Yeah, they'll come in as like one of the lower seeds and probably get crushed. But
They'll probably play like, well, how is it going to go? They're going to be the at-large third Big Ten, so they'll be like a 9 seed, right?
yeah, probably,
so 9,
10.
So they play like the team that loses the Big Ten championship or SEC championship, something like that.
Yeah, probably.
And lose.
Is there a path for Penn State to win the title this year? The only answer is Drew Aller makes a big jump to me. Like that's
and the offense clicks and they get on the opposite side of Georgia.
Yeah.
Like they win. Okay, what has to happen is they either beat Ohio State or they just get to the Big Ten championship game, win the Big Ten championship game, so they get a bye, and they're like the 2. They're like the 2 seed and Georgia's the 1 seed, and then they don't meet until the finals. And then like Carson Beck's elbow explodes.
Yeah. The team is really good and will win 10, 11 games.
Yeah.
It's tough for me to sell like a title future on them. That's
agree.
kind of where I
that's one where like it will age nicely and you're like, wow, look at this sweet bet I have going into the playoff, both like a 2% chance of hitting. Not even, probably 0.
Yeah. I mean, what are they in title odds? They are 8th. That's probably right. They're behind LSU and Ole Miss. I think they're more talented at both those teams, but like it's really hard for them to win based on how they're set up. At least in the national championship.
I agree. So, and then I want to ask this, but like, do you have any weird vibes on them going to Morgantown week 1? New offensive coordinator.
All about that.
Westphal has a lot of hype. You know what I mean? Like, weird things happen in week 1, maybe a little bit more so than like other weeks. You know what I mean? You remember they almost lost to Purdue? You remember they almost lost to Purdue? Was that 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
Yeah, but Jeff Brum's a giant killer. So like anything that Purdue does, I always say, oh wait.
And I'm not even high on Westphal either, but like I look at that game, I'm like, vibes could get weird there.
Basically, it's a Garrett Green like statement win. Like that's how West Virginia wins, and I don't think that's impossible because Garrett Green, I think, is a really fun, dynamic player. If they have issues containing him, like I don't know that the offense is gonna score points they need to. Like
2 new coordinators, like just like things go up. Like the first quarter, like Westphal gets up early, and like things just like are helter-kelter the whole way. Like I could see that. Maybe they win, but maybe it's a little bit closer. I think they're like a 10-point favorite or something like that.
Yeah. I make it 9.5, but I mean, I see the path forward that you're laying out. Like I get it.
All right. let's keep it moving though. We'll talk Michigan. Their win total, obviously, the national championship game. Their national championship team win total is heavily shaded towards the under on 9.5. North of -200. 7-1 to win the conference. They return very little, especially on the offense side of the ball. Jerome Moore is now the head coach instead of Jim Harbaugh. We think it's going to be Alex Orji on offense running this with Donovan Edwards. We think.
Probably.
Yeah, I don't really know who else. I'm not confident Alex Orji can throw a forward pass, but we'll see. I think this offense, and I think some teams in this conference, like when we're going to talk about Washington, I think we're going to see a total makeover. We don't know what's coming. Michigan, I think we know what's coming. It just might be a worse version of the national championship team. So I still think that this team is going to be pretty good. But I do think that its margin for error is basically just non-existent now, especially given the quarterback. I think the defense is still going to be really good. But I think Michigan is going to say, we're playing, like they want to. Chris, did I lose you?
For a second, I think. But
sorry about that.
No, you're good. I don't. It's going to be the same offense as last year.
Yeah.
Essentially, it was just worse parts, like you said. I think Orji's probably the worst starting quarterback in the Big Ten. I was trying to think who I think is worse, and I almost assuredly is going to be him. And then I don't like any of the options behind him. Like, what happens if he gets hurt? You're going to throw Jack Tuttle in or Jaden Denegal? They just have really not. And Jaden Davis, who is a true freshman, who I don't think is nearly ready to play. So, like, I really struggle with this Michigan offense, but I'm not sure it matters because JJ McCarthy entered Michigan as a true freshman, as like this gunslinger, like get the ball downfield, like kind of like a wild playmaker, and he wasn't asked to do any of that. And they're not going to ask Alex Orji to do any of that either.
Mm-hmm.
So they might just win the same way they won at Penn State last year, like not throwing the ball. And I don't know that that's going to work the whole schedule because their schedule is not super easy. Like that Texas game is, I have Texas favored, and I am like pretty confident. It's a short number, right? Because I have a lot of respect for Michigan's defense, but I feel pretty good that Texas is going to win that game.
Yeah,
I don't think they're on the same level as Oregon. I don't think they're on the same level as Ohio State. So, what is the ceiling for this team? Probably low because the ceiling for the offense is equally low.
Yeah, the ceiling for the team is probably if you think the offense can score 30 points in a game. That isn't like them like destroying Arkansas State. Like I'm like lighting up a Big Ten team with a high level defense.
I don't know if the offense can get there.
That's what I'm saying.
Donovan Edwards is not as good of a rusher as Blake Corum is. I don't like their receiving options. I think Colson Loveland is the best player on offense. But if you can't get him the ball, then what does it really matter? They're 115th in returning production. Like, they just don't return anybody on offense.
Yeah.
They barely return anybody on defense, too. And the three players they do return are, like, studs.
Yeah.
So, the offense is going to be basically what we saw last year, except just like a Dollar General version of it.
Yeah. You look at the schedule, they do play their first 5 games at home, one of them being Texas, as we mentioned. They do host USC, which I think could get a little hairy if USC is, humming on offense. At Washington, maybe not the most fun trip, depending on how Washington pans out by then. Oregon at home, as you mentioned. I think, and again, it's -200 to the under, so you're not like finding anything. But I was going to ask you, and it seems like it's pretty. I think that's much more likely in terms of like the observations, like the tails. The low end is much more likely than the high end. Like, I think if you had to bet like an alt under, like give them one more win, like the over 10.5 or the under 8.5, I think it has to be under 8.5 as the preferred side.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. Basically, what you're asking in Michigan this year is Mason Graham and Will Johnson wreck the game for 90% and will do just
Yeah.
enough on offense. And that just enough on offense is going to work against Minnesota, USC, Washington. It's not going to work against teams that are legitimately good on defense, like have athletes. And I mean, I don't really, this offensive line just doesn't have a lot of experience. So I can't say that it's a bad unit. I just don't really know what to expect of it.
Yeah.
Like they just don't have a lot of returning starts. Like they've Hinton, who was their right tackle last year, but like, I don't know. I really don't know I don't know how to sell myself on this offense having upside. Like I just don't know where it comes from. Like I just don't see Alex Orji as
We're
a prolific enough passer.
a coin flip to make the playoff. Like, isn't it just no? Like the path is there. I get why the odds indicate that because they host 2 games that could kind of like be part of your case to get in. But like where I guess like is there a way to back in by not playing the Big Ten championship game and hope that like all the other teams suck?
We think that 3 teams from the Big Ten are probably getting in, right?
Yeah.
At least that's
I would
the consensus.
say
So it's
it's
them or
what?
Penn State is really what it comes down to. Because I think
But I look
there's
at the
a pretty
schedule
clear
and Penn
4.
State is a much easier case, right? Like
Well, you would think the scenario for Michigan is probably this. It's they play one of Ohio State or Oregon really, really close.
and
And
it's almost like a
like,
half win.
yes. And like it's a quality loss.
Yeah.
And that's the way that like you spin it for Michigan. I just don't think I just don't think at the end of the year you're gonna look at Penn State, Michigan resume side by side and say, yeah, Michigan was a better team.
Yeah.
It's just hard to sell that story.
I agree. So a team, maybe given how we think about, maybe going to be better on offense than Michigan this year. Iowa, win total 7.5, minus 122 to the over. Obviously, there's a massive drop off in the odds. They're 41-1 to win the conference. New offense. Can they not be the worst Power 5 offense, you think, given some of the changes? Or you still think that this offense is going to be trash?
How much of it is actually Kirk Ferentz? I think the answer is a lot, to be honest. Like, I don't know. Where is he wants to play a certain way. He doesn't want to deviate from that. So he's made an offensive coordinator hire to play within that structure. And I get why he's done it. Will the offense improve? Yeah, it has to improve. Like, I just don't think it could be worse than last year.
Yeah.
Is it going to go from like 130th in what were they? 132nd in yards per play to 90th, or are they going to go to like 70th?
Mm-hmm.
There's a range of outcomes, I think, where Iowa makes an improvement. I just don't see them getting to like above the like bottom quartile of teams. That's how I
Probably.
project it. It just can't be worse.
It's more that like there are, and you read the spring game, Caleb Brown, wide receiver, everyone was like excited. It's easy to say that in March rather than in October. But Lachey's back at tight end. Do we think it's going to be Cade McNamara? Maybe it's Brendan Sullivan. I don't really know if there's much of a difference between the two. Does it really matter? They both are pretty bad.
I expect to be McNamara, and I think McNamara is probably a better player than Sullivan is. Yeah, Caleb Brown. This is like the second straight season that he's had hype from or off-season hype, and like, they don't throw to the wide receiver. He also, we're recording this on June 24th. He also got arrested like 4 hours ago. So like, what comes out of that? I don't know.
See that.
So it's like, what exactly this offense looks like. Like, I think the best player on this offense, again, like Michigan, is the tight end Luke Lachey, who I think those could actually be the top 2 tight ends in the country. But man, like, I don't think anything's going to change because I don't think Kirk Ferentz wants to change. Yeah. I think Kirk Ferentz holds the entire team and organization hostage. Like, he certainly has more power than any athletic director has at Iowa. He's been there for 20 plus years. Like, Kirk Ferentz is bigger than Iowa football. He's like truly a force to be reckoned with, like in the politics of Iowa University. So I don't know.
The defense loses Cooper DeJean. They're still top 10 in return production, though. I mean, this defense, I think we could still say, is going to be an elite unit. They bring enough back between Higgins, Castro. I think it should be business as usual for the Hawkeyes defense. Their special teams might take a hit, though, losing their punter. But, I mean, I look at the schedule. It's hard not to be pretty confident this team can get to 8 wins. I don't know how it always happens. It just feels like Iowa always has a good schedule. But it's not the easiest, but you look, okay, where are they like auto losses? It's at Ohio State. After that, though, they're going to be favored in every game.
You,
It'll be lost. It is within a field goal.
I guess they get Wisconsin at home, right? So I think I would have Wisconsin favored on the road. But
They have
outside of
Nebraska
that,
at home,
yeah, I mean, it's really tough to
Iowa State at home.
find places where you don't like Iowa, right? Like, I mean, I'm looking at their schedule and I'm just like, yeah, I think they're better than Minnesota. Minnesota is almost like a carbon copy of them, except I think their offense is going to be better than it was last year. Washington, I don't think much of. Michigan State, I don't think much of. I'm just like, where is this? Where are these other losses coming from? I just don't think there's enough on there to be confident. Like, UCLA is a coin flip in terms of like would I make it, but I don't like. I would never touch UCLA in that game.
Exactly.
Like, right? It's really, really tough to see. But Phil Parker is like possibly the best defense coordinator in college football. Like, do we really think that this defense could take a step back regardless of who leaves? I don't think so. I mean, they always have a good punter too. Yeah, like Taylor's a tough loss, but again, like they have one of the best special teams coordinator in the country, LeVar Woods. The continuity at key coaching positions is really helpful, and then the lack of continuity at offensive coordinator is even better.
I mean, if you just go through their schedule, if they win all their home games, they go undefeated at home, and we know it's tough to play in Iowa City. They need to win one road game to get over their win total. And this 7.5 isn't, and again, we can just do this. They lose a singular home game. Okay, they just have to win 2 of their road games. And outside of Ohio State, it's Minnesota, Michigan State, UCLA, Maryland. Not one of those teams is on a neutral better than them. So maybe they could do that.
Yeah.
But this win total also isn't some seismic jump. This isn't like a team that, oh, well, their offense is always bad and now they're expected to win a lot of games. No, like Iowa wins this amount of games very regularly. This would be a pretty average home season if they went 8-4. So kind of tough not to be bullish given the expectation of this team.
Yeah, I agree. Right, it's shaded a little bit towards the over. Right, it's minus
Marginally.
22. Yeah, so it's not like you're. I don't know. It's hard not to like Iowa just based on the schedule, right? A lot of this comes down to scheduling, and Iowa's in a really, really good spot avoiding the top teams again. Right? Like, yes, you're going to lose to Ohio State. Fine. Like, you don't Michigan, you don't Oregon, you don't Penn State. You're avoiding 3 of the top 4 teams in the conference, and you're getting a lot of the bottom of the conference. Minnesota, Northwestern. I think UCLA deserves to be there too. Like, you're getting very, very favorable matchups, especially where you sit home and away. So
yeah,
I mean, I think this is probably an 8-win team. I don't trust them in certain matchups just because they're Iowa.
Yeah,
I'm like, a toss up versus Minnesota. That's a game they can easily lose. It's like it's gonna be one of the lowest scoring games in the country this year.
Yeah,
but like, is that going to happen 3 more times? I don't
exactly.
It's hard to make that case.
Another team expected to take a big jump forward on offense is Nebraska. They have a win total of 7.5. Dylan Raiola, I think believe can seize the job and run through with this. I mean, they get Jamal Banks from Wake Forest, Naylor from Wyoming and Texas. Running back room should be pretty full. Chris, how do you kind of rate this Nebraska offense? Like, is Raiola in the fantasy community? Is he expected to meet the hype?
he is certainly ready enough to play quarterback. I'll say that, right? And he's probably,
Mm,
if he's not your quarterback one in the class, he's probably your quarterback two, in terms of incoming freshmen. So he's a really solid, good player, and he will start week one. Like I would be very shocked if he didn't.
yeah.
Um, how he adjusts, like I felt the same about Dante Moore last year. Like I felt Dante Moore was like ready to come in and play, and he just did not look like that at all. And I think part of that was the offensive line, and I think the offensive line for Nebraska is probably more helpful. Thomas Carkeran returns after missing like half the season to a foot injury. Um, I like their other tackle too on the right side, Ben Hart. So I think that he's going to have the ability to stay in the pocket and not be flushed. So I think that's really, really good to start the season for him. I also have them favored in their first 8 of 9 games. So it's just such
Yep.
a nice start to the season too. And I think the skill positions are probably the best they've been in Nebraska for a while. You mentioned Jamal Banks. I thought he was really good at Wake Forest. Malachi Coleman is a freaky athlete that I think could be a big part of this offense if he like refines technically a little bit. And you have Thomas Fedone finally removed 2 years removed from like double ACL tears. So there's enough pieces here to support a competent offense too. I am bullish on Nebraska. I think everybody's bullish on Nebraska, but I think with good reason.
Yeah, and you think last year they had more turnovers than any team in the country. They had 31. You got to think that has to take a step back. Now they have at least a semi-competent quarterback coming in. We think maybe potentially a very competent quarterback coming in Raiola. So it's tough not to get super excited. Satterfield, the offensive coordinator, I don't love. So maybe like the high-end outcomes I don't feel as confident in, where it's like,
Oh,
they
I'll
go.
just say I hate him. I think he's one of the worst offensive coordinators in the country. I had to deal with him in South Carolina for years, so like I am
So
qualified to speak on
maybe
the
it's
subject.
like, so I do wonder if maybe some of the ceiling stuff that I see some love about isn't there, but tough not to think that this is finally the year Nebraska could get, well over 500, play to expectation, because this is a big jump in win total, but this one is justified in my opinion, given where this team has been and some of the regression type things that like people like to spot. Like, again, turnovers. They have the most turnovers in the country. Maybe this team is just cursed forever, but you'd think that those things kind of eventually equal themselves out. They also have what was a top 20 defense under a really good defensive coordinator and Tony White, and they are, pretty high in terms of returning production. I don't have that sheet in front of me right now, but they return the likes of Isaac Gifford. They also reduce some turnover regression on this side of the ball. They only had 14 forced despite allowing top 10 yards per play. It's playing like a top 15 unit in the country. So I think this Nebraska team's going to be pretty damn good.
Yeah, they are 18th in returning production on defense, and I
Yeah.
like a lot of the players that they return to. One player that I think is pretty interesting, um, that I think could be like a legit impact player in the secondary is Tommy Hill. He was a first year transfer last year, but he played on both sides of the ball for like a good chunk of the season. Or was like practicing there. Then down the stretch, he was really good. So I wonder if that their secondary grades are a little low, or like they're
Mhm.
projected a little low because we haven't seen him like totally unleashed. And I think he could be a pretty like solid corner for them. And if he's capable of shutting down like wide receiver ones in the Big Ten, like this Nebraska team could be good because I like their defensive line a lot too. Like Robinson and Hutmacher, I think it's Hutmacher, but I'm not positive how you pronounce it. Like they're both all conference quality. Like maybe not first team all conference, but they're like second, third team all conference defensive tackles. I don't know. I think it's a really good defense too. Like, there's a lot to like about Nebraska.
Yeah.
Matt Rule's the king of quick turnarounds, and I think he's done a really good job in 3 years.
So are you win total over?
I That's what my numbers tell me.
Yeah.
Like
It's
that.
hard not to think so. I mean, I guess you could say the schedule's backloaded. I mean, they closed 4 of 6 on the road, but like you said,
Yeah.
there's a chance they go into that game in week 9, 8-0. See, and at Iowa, and that's still over. You're over in October.
Yeah. I have them favored, like I said, in their 8 of their first 9, exception being Ohio State. I think they could beat USC I think they're going to struggle with Wisconsin, but I think they could beat Wisconsin. And then I have them losing to Iowa. But I mean, this team has a huge range of outcomes in terms of like what you can expect on the positive side. I just think the floor is kind of high as well because good defensive line. The question on offense is going to be how ready is Dylan Raiola? I think the answer is pretty ready, just based on what we've seen from him in high school. And you're not going to get like a dynamic rusher, right? Like, that's just not who he is. But he's a really good pocket passer, and I think that's all the offense needs, especially with the weapons that they have. And I think the weapons are good. I wouldn't call them like a leader or anything, but like I like the players.
Yeah. Another team with a win total of 7.5. USC win total shade towards the under, like -120. Nothing crazy. They're viewed as I guess like the fringe candidate. They're 25-1 to win the conference. And maybe he's not Caleb Williams. He might not be Kyler Murray or Baker Mayfield, but Miller Moss was a top 15 QB recruit. He has a boatload of weapons at his disposal. Is USC, Chris, to you, just like plug and replace, keep this thing rolling? Or are there some concerns? Because I think you can look at it the other way. It's really just Woody Marks, that running back from Mississippi State. There's not a lot of depth there. Wide receivers are always going to be filthy. Offensive line, there's maybe some depth concerns. Do you think Miller Moss can still run this offense at a, call it, top 20 rate like it's been under Lincoln Riley?
I really don't like Miller Moss. To be honest,
Okay.
I really don't trust him. I mean, we saw that he looked just dreadful in the spring game, and not that Jada Mayava looked any better, but like Jada Mayava, at least he gives you something with his legs that I don't think Miller Moss does. And Mayava is also third. Like this is his second year. Like he was a true freshman at UNLV last year, so I would not be surprised if we saw him start the majority of the season. And I think that's a better option. But
I'm a fan. I just think I didn't know if he can make that jump, given the circumstances.
Yeah, he didn't look good in spring either. Like they both played horribly, so I don't want to like act like one was better than the other. But I think you get more out of Mayava than you do Miller Moss. But Miller Moss stuck in the program through the Caleb Williams transfer, with probably the hope that hey, someday I'll be the guy when Williams leaves, and like this is his opportunity. I'm sure he will start week 1. The issue that I see with USC is their schedule's tough. It's just a tough schedule to when talk about the win total, right? Defense was ranked, depending how you looked at it, like bottom 20 last year. Like 35 points per game. EPA per play was ranked 122nd. Like just not a good unit. I think it's going to take a jump. How big that jump is probably determining whether this is a 7-win team or a 8-9 win team. I like the hire of Dan Lynn. I think he's a really, really good defense coordinator. He was at UCLA last year, did wonders for them. And I think their culture is really changing, right? They brought in the North Dakota State head coach to be their linebacker coach. And I just think like culturally that defense is going to be a lot tougher to play against. I think that was the big issue that you saw last year. So I think they take a step defensively. Can the offense keep up? I don't know. Is the schedule tough? Yeah, it's tough. USC is one of the harder teams to project because I think there's a lot of questions, and I feel really good about certain things like defense improving, but really bad about the quarterback play. Really questioning what the running back position looks like. Like you said, there's not really depth there. I like the weapons on offense, but like Zachariah Branch is still like a limited receiver. He needs to be used around the line of scrimmage. Deuce Robinson was playing baseball in the spring, so like he didn't get a lot of work. They like Jacoby Lane. Jacoby Lane's like a bigger outside guy, but what exactly is his role? I'm not sure. Mekhi Lemon is, again, second-year guy. What is he going to do? There's just a lot of questions on this team. Some of them I think I feel better about than others.
You're going to see, and this might be a polarizing team. I think this is where you're going to see some people like Well, USC has the athletes that Big Ten defenses are not used to, and they are going to just cook because it's USC and it's Lincoln Riley. Whereas you could have the more pessimistic case where it's, well, they're traveling across the country every week for about a month and a half, and their quarterback is not Caleb Williams, Kyler Murray, or Baker Mayfield, and the defense is going to be better, but it's still year one. It's all transfers, so there's not a lot of depth, and again, it might not translate very nicely. So I think this is a polarizing team. I lean towards the under. Wouldn't say like with a lot of conviction because, like you said, I think there's a lot of things in the air. But to run through the schedule, they open against LSU in Vegas on a Sunday. I mean, they're going to be an underdog. They can win, but they're going to be an underdog. I don't think that morning would be the craziest thing. Then they play week 2 at home. They get their bye. And then it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in a row. Each game, home, road, back and forth. 3 of which are on the East Coast. And then they host Nebraska, who we just said could maybe be really good this year, at UCLA, who we're going to get to. We both, I don't think very highly of, and then Notre Dame at home to close the year. So pretty guaranteed underdog in 4 of these games. So if they lose LSU, at Michigan, home Penn State, home Notre Dame, they lose those 4. Are they going to be able to avoid the one loss to at Minnesota in week 6 or an at Maryland in week 8? Like, no, probably not. They're probably gonna end up with 7 wins.
Yeah, I think we're a year away from like a better USC team. I think we need to figure out the defense in terms of what the structure looks like. And like scheme wise, year one, like you said, there's so many transfers and whatnot. And I don't think the quarterback is on the roster right now. The guy who's starting next year. I just really don't. And I mean, they were in on Will Howard too down the stretch. Like they were clearly shopping. And I think I like Maava. I do. But like we said, UNLV to USC and USC in the Big Ten is a huge jump for a player who has, what does he have, like 6 or 7 starts in his career because he was a freshman last year. So yeah, I don't, it's hard for me to see them winning the games that they are underdogs in too, right? Like I don't know that they could beat LSU, even though it's a neutral site, which is, it's like more of a USC home game considering LSU has to travel from like Baton Rouge to Vegas, whatever. USC doesn't really have fans that travel though, so not really sure you can call it a home game. But yeah, it's tough. It's not an easy schedule for USC.
Yeah. Another Pac-12 import, Washington, win total 6.5, shade towards the over, -144. To me, I think that this win total is just a guess because we have no idea what Washington's going to be this year. They lose basically everybody off their national championship winning roster, definitely on the offense. They bring in Jed Fish. He brings his offensive coordinator, Carroll, with him. They're dead last in offensive returning production. Will Rogers hung around. We think he's going to be a starting quarterback. They bring Jonah Coleman from Arizona. They lose their top 4 wide receivers from last year. I don't know. Do you have any upside in this offense? Are you a believer? Because I think Jed Fish, interesting hire. Really, he brought Arizona back to the, their prominence, and then, he cashes in to get the Washington job. I don't know. He recruits really well, but I don't necessarily give him a lot of like X's and O's chops, in my opinion. So I don't think that crazy about this hire. I think that this is a lot of win total in projection. I think the floor is dumb low for this team. I think this offense might suck.
Yeah, I think this whole team could be terrible.
They might suck. They might be like a 3-win team. This might be total teardown.
Yeah, there's just not like 100th in defensive returning production, dead last in offensive returning production, and the players that you do return are not necessarily your studs either. Right? You lose Jabbar Muhammad, who stayed in college but goes to Oregon. Mm-hmm. So the players that you return, I don't think either super highly of, or like maybe haven't had the chance to make an impact. Best player I think on this offense is going to be Denzel Boston. But like, does he have a quarterback? Does he have a quarterback throwing him the ball that's decent? I don't know. I like their freshman Damon Williams, but like he's really raw. Like, and he's more of a rusher, so he's not. I mean, maybe he'll play because Will Rogers is not sure how good he'll fit into this offense. But yeah, it's a really tough Washington team to figure out, and what's challenging too when trying to project their win total is their schedule is not really that tough.
Yeah, they have an easy
It's like
schedule.
they're going to be favored in like depending on how much you weight previous production, like 5 to 7 games. I've been favored in 6, but like not a confident 6, and like I'll probably end up downgrading them a little bit more because like I need to really change the way that I was weighting their production even further. But like it's not a tough schedule regardless.
Yeah, they can be bad and still have enough wins on the schedule. They host Washington State, who I think is a tough team to project this year. Now this win total has dipped below the key number of 7. It's come off. It was a flat 7, and now it's 6.5. I think though, plus money, you can bet that. I think under 6.5 is fine. The defense, again, questions everywhere. You don't really know. Like you said, 100th in returning production. Bring back a few linebackers. They did hit the portal and got Presock from Alabama, but like you said, that's kind of just replacing Muhammad, and he's worse than Muhammad. So not really sure, but like again, the ceiling is not high. The ceiling is 7 wins. So you can pay minus 144 for the absolute best case scenario, or you take plus money that this team is a little bit worse than this basic guess of what this team is.
Yeah, I think like you're not beating Oregon, you're not beating Penn State, you're not beating Michigan. That's 3 right there, right? So I think the max upside that you can project is like 9 wins, and that assumes that you don't lose to Iowa, don't struggle against USC, don't struggle against UCLA, don't struggle against an improved Rutgers team, beat Washington State, who we don't know who their quarterback is, but like I think they return enough production to be dangerous. So
yeah, I'm sure they also like it's the Apple Cup. You know what I mean? Like that
exactly.
You're going to get their best, especially after last year.
Yeah, I would not be betting over on this team. Is the bottom line. I just can't do it. I don't know if I'm betting under because I think the schedule is okay, but I'm certainly not betting over. Like if anything, it's an under bet.
You mentioned Rutgers improved. Is that you're buying into Calic Manis really taking a step forward with Kirk Soroka, or is this more? I'm butchering the name for sure, but Monagai and the offensive line returning some starters, and the defense still being elite, and really pouncing on a favorable schedule that this team should be improved. They have a win total of 6.5 as well.
Yeah. No, it is not Calic Manis. I'm shocked that a Power 5 program took Calic Manis. Like to be truthful, I think he's one of the worst quarterbacks in Power 5. He might not even be like a good FBS quarterback. I'm not like positive he is. But he does have a
you don't like the Greek rifle? The Greek rifle?
Exactly. He's got a strong arm, and that's pretty much all he has. And he doesn't really use it effectively. Yeah, I just really like Monangai against this schedule. They returned 77% of offensive line snaps, and like they were pretty efficient last year. I don't think there's a stud lineman, but I think they work really well as a unit, and I think Monangai could take enough advantage of that. Defense too, right? Like they returned 8 of 11 starters. They're 15th in defensive returning production. They just get a lot back, and the reason I like Rutgers, and maybe even if the team is not like super improved, it doesn't matter. You don't get Oregon, you don't get Michigan, you don't get Ohio State, you don't get Penn State. You get UCLA at home, you get Minnesota at home. Like it's a really nice schedule for the Scarlet Knights.
Yeah, I mean it's a team that top 5 in both explosive rush and explosive pass rate. I wouldn't say a ton of havoc per se. They didn't get in the backfield all that much, but I mean, it's a disciplined defense. We know Greg Schiano is, maybe not the ceiling, but he's an above average coach. We know he can coach. I mean, it's tough not to be excited, like you said, given the schedule where I mean, while they do avoid the elite Big Ten teams, they do go at Virginia Tech. So let's call that a likely loss. They go to USC on a short week. They play at Nebraska. Wisconsin at home. Sure, that's 4. We think Washington might be bad. 5. And even still, you lose those. You just got to run the rest of Howard, Akron, UCLA, Minnesota, Illinois, all at home. And then at Michigan State or at Maryland. I mean, tough not to be excited about this team, especially where there's so much back on the defense. You know that at least the same as last year, which are right around this win total. And the schedule is easier.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think this team has improved just based on returning production alone. Just like you have more experience back. Like that's even if your experience isn't amazing or your returning starters aren't amazing, like at least they have more comfort in this offense, right? And I think Shiano is a good enough motivator and coach to get the most out of. He's going to get the most out of his team. I believe that, which tells me I'm aggressively targeting Kyle Monangai in fantasy drafts because I think the schedule is so nice, and I think he's a really talented rusher, and the offensive line is that consistency. I worry about Kaliak Manis, but I'm not sure it's really going to matter. I actually like the freshman they brought in last year, Johnny Shepard. He's kind of like a bigger athlete type kid. I would be really excited if he got in and to see because I think he gives the offense a higher ceiling. So if he plays, maybe we're having a little bit different conversation. But yeah,
over on the win total.
What is it currently?
6.5. I don't have the odds on it.
Over 6.5. Oh, with plus money too.
That's what. Yes.
I think I lean that way.
DraftKings has a flat 6.
Okay, at what number?
-115 to the over.
Oh,
they're going bowling.
I like that.
Yeah, they're going bowling.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
I have them favored in 5 games, but like I have 4 more that are essentially toss-ups.
Yeah. All right, cool. Now let's talk about my Wisconsin Badgers. Injuries kind of derailed the team last year. They went to the Dairy Raid, which you aptly told me was the nickname going around the college fantasy space. I think they kind of pivoted away from that in a way due to injury, and we saw a little bit of an uptick, and it worked. They move on from Tanner Mordecai. It's now Tyler Van Dyke, who I don't like. Can't stay healthy. I don't trust the arm. They also lose Braylon Allen. It's probably Ches Malusi, who's off a serious leg injury. I'm concerned about the defense. I think it's still a year away from being where it needs to be. The numbers looked good last year, but I did not match my eye test. The above average offenses really cooked them, I think. The schedule does not no favors. That's indicating the win total of 6.5, shaded towards the over. Chris, am I now too pessimistic on my my school, or do you kind of vibe with me?
I like Tyler Van Dyke more than you do, I think. So maybe I'm a little bit more positive. I really did not like Wisconsin last year. Like, I was very skeptical of year one. I don't know. Like, is Ches Malusi all that much worse than Braylon Allen is? I think in some ways he is. Like, I don't think you're going to get as many as explosives, but like I think down to down, you might have a little bit more consistency. I love Will Pauling. Like, I think he's a really, really solid receiver. I like some of the other options on this offense too. I don't know. Wisconsin a really tough team for me to figure out which direction they're going to go because the offense is still so foreign to to the players that were recruited there. Like they were recruited like a very different skill set, I think. So I think they're still trying to like mold this team into a more competitive version of themselves, and what that means TBD. I am very curious though. Like when we said we were recording, I was really interested to get your thoughts on this because, uh, you know, it's an interesting offense, especially, and I think the defense is gonna be fine.
Yeah, I think Okay. I think last year I was more optimistic than you, and you were less optimistic than me. Uh,
Yes.
so I think Van Dyke, we'll see how this comes together. I worry that the injuries have built up. There's so much tape of him, the lack of arm strength. I know they're going to throw so much underneath. I just wonder if this whole marriage, not with Luke Fickle, but more with Phil Longo and what this team wants to do. I don't think the quarterback is there yet to run this type of offense, in my opinion.
Do, do you think that quarterback is on the roster? Because I don't. Like
No, it's not. And I
I
think
don't like Braden Locke either.
what I believe they're trying to do is Luke Fickle is trying to build up the recruiting pipeline, which is still in progress. And he's playing quarterback roulette to kind of pass the time over and hope he can maybe catch lightning in a bottle. I thought Mordecai
I think that's fair.
was going to be okay, and he just couldn't stay healthy enough. I don't really like Van Dyke, even when he was that healthy. Even when 2 years ago when he popped off before he got hurt, I not a huge fan.
I think he's an improvement over Mordecai, and I think that he is uniquely suited to run this offense, is what I will say. He just needs to stay healthy. And that's been a huge issue, like you said.
Okay, and you said you believe in this defense still. I you just look at last year's results, like Washington State, Cam Ward cooked them, and there are some high-powered offenses on the schedule, especially relative to a Big Ten schedule. I say that with a caveat, but like Alabama comes to Madison. I know it's a new offense, but Wisconsin doesn't have the chops to hang with Alabama. Not many teams do. They go to USC. I don't love that matchup for them. Penn State comes to town. We'll see. Oregon comes to Madison. We'll see. At Iowa, there's a lot of Iowa. I don't throw Iowa in the offense situation, but that's like another challenging game at Iowa. At Nebraska, if Raiola puts together, like there are, I think, some issues with this team. It's not your typical Wisconsin defense.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I have this unit graded fairly highly, but a lot of that is on the back of the secondary. And all the
Yep.
teams that you mentioned are built in the trenches more than anything, right? Like that's what Penn
Yeah.
State does. That's what Alabama is going to do. That's what Iowa does. That's what Oregon does. Like all of those teams are built to like grind you down at the line of scrimmage. And yeah, I have a lot of questions about this defensive front, especially. I don't know. I don't know that I'm super high on the Elijah Hills kid they brought in. Um, I don't think I've seen enough of him to really have an opinion, but I think there's a lot of questions in that
Yeah.
in that front.
Again, this is a team that did a very good job again against a pretty soft schedule, but more closer to like national average in terms of success rate. They were able to get run on more so than they did in the past. I mean, this was a unit several years ago, sub 3 yards per carry, just absolutely nails. It wasn't that last year. EPA per rush was pretty solid, but in terms of just like pure success rate, pretty not great relative to Wisconsin. Didn't drive a lot of havoc. Those are where some of my concerns where I think that the bend don't break style, the 3-3-5 that Tressel runs, I think there's a little bit of a growing pains there given what we're used to with Wisconsin. And I still question the upside of the offense.
I think I don't have a strong enough opinion on them to feel one way or the other in terms of their win total. Because I see, right, like my numbers tell me that they're going to be favored in probably how many games is that? 8. But like that's not a confident 8.
Yeah.
It's the games that we talked about them probably losing, and then like I have them favored versus Iowa, but like I don't really know what to do with that. Like they're probably going to get beat up in the trenches. So yeah, it's a tough team, and I certainly you're way more plugged into it than I am. So maybe I need to take down my excitement just like a notch.
Yeah, I just think there's a little bit more questions than usual that I would like heading into the season. Another team with some questions, Minnesota. I don't have much to say here. Win total 5.5, shade towards the under. It looks like it's going to be Max Brosmer from New Hampshire, but I think this team is going to be at quarterback, I should say, more of a low yards per attempt, throw underneath, game manager type. But this is probably going to be on the back of Darius Taylor. They bring in Bangura from Ohio. 4 or 5 back in the line. I think we kind of know that this Minnesota team wants to stick to what they've been doing of late. So I think you were saying, Chris, that you're maybe a little higher on Minnesota?
Yeah, I like Max Brosmer coming in for New Hampshire. New Hampshire wasn't a gimmicky offense, but like they were way more talented than the majority of the schedule they played. So his numbers are probably way more inflated than they reflect. But he's still he's still an upgrade over Cali McManus for sure.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have any depth behind him though, so if he gets hurt, it's true freshman Drake Lindsay, who I like long term. I actually think he's a pretty interesting player. He's big, he's got a strong arm. But he's not ready. So if he goes down, then this team could be really bad. Um, I don't know how I feel about skill weapons though. Outside of Darius Taylor, like Darius Taylor is legit, but Daniel Jackson's really good, and then it's guys I don't like behind him. Like I think depth is a huge problem at the receiver position. And like they don't really have a lot of experience at tight end either. So there's just like, weapons of the passing game just aren't there. And the offensive line returns like 80% of snaps.
Mm-hmm.
Ursery's back, and I think that's huge.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that there's plenty of questions on this team. And the schedule, I would say, it's just there's so many coin tosses. I mean, they have 2 likely wins, and I mean, coin toss at UCLA, at Illinois, at Rutgers, UNC at home in week 1, Maryland. I mean, it's just tough to really get a gauge on where this team is going to be. I don't have much to say. The defense dropped off. Rossi leaves. They promote Heatherman. There were a lot of injuries. I saw somewhere they were like in the top 10 in terms of games lost in terms of injury. So maybe the defense takes another jump, but I don't have a strong opinion here. Probably a below average Big Ten team.
I am not like super confident, but I do like the under on their win total.
Yeah, I agree.
It's hard for me to find. I had them favored in 2 games.
URI in Nevada.
Yeah. That's it. And I mean, it's a toss up. I think Rutgers, Illinois, and Maryland are all close. I think UCLA is close as well, but it's just they return a lot of production on defense, and I don't know how good that production actually is. Like I think their front is pretty good, but I have a lot of questions about the back seven. A lot of questions.
Yeah. Yeah, another team with a ton of concerns, UCLA. Win total 5.5. It's Garber's back, it's TJ Harden back, but whole new coaching staff. Eric Bieniemy comes in. Wide receiver, I still think is pretty solid between Sturdivant. The offensive line returns 5 starters, but no depth. Sub 50% returning production on the defensive side of the ball. They lose 26 combined sacks between Latu and the Murphy brothers. Secondaries, all transfers. I mean, again, another team where this is kind of a guess on their win total. And, I guess, Chris, I'll let you speak about the team, and then I can tell you about this murderer's row of a schedule.
Yeah. I just don't see the production on either side of the ball to feel confident, right? Like, I don't have a lot of faith in Ethan Garbers. I don't know how TJ Harden's going to do in a full-time role. I like that they brought in Rico Flores from Notre Dame. I don't think he was a bad player last year, but I don't know that he's a high-end player. Offensive line, again, right? We get 3 starters back, and I think getting Holstage back is solid, but like he's still an inside guy, right? Like your tackles, I think, are probably your 2 weakest spots of this team. So, and this offensive line wasn't good last year. It's a big reason why Dante Moore struggled early, and basically the whole season because the offensive line never really improved. Defense loses too much. They return I think 4 starters on defense, but none of them are particularly impact players. At least in terms of what they compared to what they lost. UCLA is a really, really tough team to like this year, like just personnel wise, and that's even before getting to the schedule.
Yeah, and Garbers is a game manager. I think he was pretty solid, but when you talk about like, can he carry it? Like he needs some help around him to really thrive. So I don't see a ton going on here. They open at Hawaii, which And they're not going to lose, but I don't think that's like the best trip for a brand new coaching staff and first time head coaching Deshaun Foster.
Would you be surprised if they did lose that game? Because I'm not sure I would be. I think I kind of am
No.
buying into year three under Timmy Chang a little bit. I think he's kind of
Also,
done some
again,
interesting stuff.
it's a full new staff. This team has no idea what they're doing. They're going up to Hawaii for week 1. I don't know. Definitely, like, they're probably not going to lose. I mean, they're what, like 2 touchdown favorites now, maybe even more than that. So I don't think it would be crazy, but I mean, I don't expect them to lose, but like, yeah, that could be a shoot. Like, I'm probably leaning towards taking Hawaii with the points there. Week 1, early read episode here. I'd probably take Hawaii with the points because their offense is a tough-ish prep. There's like they have speed and it's like a unique offense. So yeah, they're going to put a test to UCLA really quickly. They get a week 2 bye, and then it's 6 games in a row traveling across the country each way. The schedule goes Indiana at home, at LSU, Oregon, at Penn State. If they're alive then, they get Minnesota at home, a nice break for them, and it's at Rutgers again, another cross-country trip. Then it's a bye before they go at Nebraska out of the bye, so the bye is almost like negating any advantage. Home Iowa, at Washington on a short week. I guess that's like it's not as much flying, but yeah, USC at home, and then they might not care for the last game of the year being home Fresno State, who I'll tell you now, I think is the best team in the Mountain West this year. So I just told you a little schedule, Chris. Where are the wins?
They got 4 games they're favored for me. And some of that is liking
4.
some teams probably more than the market, and disliking UCLA. The win total reflects, I think, too much of UCLA's recent history and not enough of what's currently going on at UCLA. And I think what's currently going on at UCLA is really bad, really bad news. Like this team is in for it, man. Like I know it's juiced to the under a little bit, like 5.5. What is it? Minus 154. But like I don't see a 6 win.
Yeah, I agree with you. I bet the under.
Yeah, I think that's
the
right side.
Yeah. You said earlier Illinois you're not very high on. And this was the one where I said last year they really overachieved 2 years ago. Great year. And then the win total took a 2-3 win increase to 7.5. And I was like, this, you gotta go under. It's too big of a jump. This expectation is too high for what Illinois really is. And we saw the team fall back down to earth. Now we're back in like a normal Illinois range, 5.5. My FanDuel. The offense, Luke Altmaier, the offensive line was terrible in pass pro. They are hoping for a little bit of improvement there. Maybe they could, reshuffle the deck. The run blocking is pretty solid, so I think that it's not like that dire. They did just bring in Zachary Franklin. He's gonna be good to go, which I think is a pretty, he didn't really play last year, but I think that could be a pretty big jump. But Chris, how do you rate Luke Altmaier?
He's okay. I think will do just enough to get the offense on schedule, but he's not a difference maker at the position. That's. I remember when John Paddock came in, and it was like this dude was incredible.
The whole thing opened up, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, well, why couldn't Luke Altmaier do this? Like, he was a 4-star recruit, wasn't he? But yeah, the weapons are interesting though. They lose Isaiah Williams to the NFL, who is like this really interesting player. Came in as a quarterback, like really like a weapon type guy. I like Pat Bryant. Think he's a pretty good wide receiver. He's got size, like more of a prototypical X type. They do bring in Zachary Franklin. And Zachary Franklin is such an interesting player to me because Zachary Franklin was really, really good at UTSA. And when he transferred out of UTSA, I don't think that they were sad to see him go. And like I don't want to speculate, I guess, because I have not been told anything firsthand, but I have heard that he is not the easiest guy in the locker room. So I don't know if I want to pencil him into having a huge role this year, given what we've seen years from Franklin. Do you think that the depth behind him and Pat Bryant is concerning? Like, I don't think much about Ashton Hollins. I think this Malik Elzy kid might be all right, but like he's another big size guy.
Yep.
The receiving room is just like big dudes. They're all over 6'2". Um, yeah, I this is a really really tough offense for me to project. Just in general.
Yeah, the defense fell off last year, which I think was to be expected given who they lost with Witherspoon and Ryan Walters leaving for Purdue. But the secondary still has some, even though I think last year was a below average group in terms of like EPA per pass, but I think that the secondary is probably still the strength of this team. They do lose Newton to the pros, so I think there are some holes in the defensive line, but I think Illinois, this is a pretty like rightful expectation for them, right? Like 5, 6 wins. I don't know if like they really have much upside. I mean, you look at the schedule, 3 likely wins: Eastern Illinois, Central Michigan, and Purdue. A bunch of coin flips between Minnesota, Michigan State, Northwestern. Home Kansas is probably like, can you get some revenge? I probably lean towards the under. Don't have a lot of expectation or anything like that.
I lean towards the under, and basically in my notes I said, "Where is the 6th win coming from?" Because I just don't see it. I don't even give
Exactly.
that. I have Purdue as a toss up game. Like I think
Okay,
they have 2 wins.
interesting.
It's Eastern Illinois and Central Michigan. Outside of that, I just don't see the path to 6. I really don't. I mean, the defensive line is going to take a huge step back. Just period. I mean, you can't lose Newton and Randolph and replace them with, I mean, Dennis Briggs from Florida State, Gentle Hunt from Florida A&M, who is like an all-conference player, but like Florida A&M does not play a high-level competition. It's like that's a huge
Yeah.
adjustment for him. They run the kid from Auburn, who I don't remember what his first name is. Last name Sledge or something similar to that. Yeah, the front's going to be terrible, or not terrible, but it's going to be a huge step back from what it had been the last couple of years.
Um,
And it could be terrible. To be honest, I don't have it graded very highly. I do think the secondary I like. Actually, they made a really interesting hire. They have Aaron Henry already on staff, who's kind of like this DB wizard. They also bring
mhm.
in Corey Parker from Toledo, who was their DB coach last year, and I think had been for maybe 2 or 3 years prior. I'm really interested to see what the secondary does because I think they don't have the players or like the skill, but I'm not sure how much that's going to matter. Like they have 2 of the best defensive back coaches like in the country on staff currently.
Interesting. But yeah, I agree with you. I think the ceiling is just tough to project with this Illinois team. I will tell you though, next up, as we hit the dregs of the Big Ten, and this is kind of the last team that I have a strong opinion on. Maybe one more after this, but Indiana is a flag plant team for me. Over 5.5. This team's definitely going bowling. They hire Kurt Signetti from James Madison. They raid the portal. They bring Curtis Rourke from Ohio, who wasn't as good as he was 2 years ago off the blown knee, but still was above average, especially as a pocket passer. Some of his explosiveness was gone. This team is all different, though. A bunch of JMU transfers from both sides of the ball, like Surratt and Pons at corner. They also bring in Miles Price from Texas Tech. Miles Cross from Ohio has a relationship with Rourke. The offensive line was trash. Maybe there's some continuity because they do return a bunch and they land a Wisconsin transfer. The team was so god awful that I think that this injection from Signetti with these transfers, I think it's going to gel. And the floor and the expectation isn't even that high because they have a really easy schedule. And I think that they're actually going to overachieve. And some of these games that are likely lost, I think could turn into more coin tossy type things. Again, to me, UCLA, their win total is 5.5, and they could be heading towards like a year 0 thing. I don't think Kurt Signetti's taking this job at Indiana with the idea, given how he's building the roster, that it's going to be a year 0. I think this is like we want to compete right now, especially with some of these JMU guys coming in. A lot of veterans.
I'm not sure I feel as strongly about Indiana, but I do also like the over 5.5. So I have them favored in 5 games, but I have them in a toss-up um, against. I have UCLA favored toss-up, Washington toss-up. Um, I like this Indiana team. Return 2 starters on the offense, but like 9 transfers, and those transfers are pretty good.
Like, the chances are better than
Here's the
who
point.
they had. So, like, losing the starters isn't even
Yes,
that
they
big of a
are.
deal. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Here's the question that I have though. Last year they had Brendan Sorsby at quarterback, and I think Sorsby is a pretty good player. I'm not sure he's significantly
Mhm.
worse than Curtis Rourke is. Um, but Curtis Rourke has missed time now, like 2 seasons in a row, and like plays through injury, and like when he's playing through injury, he has not been effective. So what happens if we have Taven Jackson in? Like, that concerns me because I think the skill positions are pretty good. Like I like Donovan McCulley. Like teams were trying to get him from Indiana, and he stayed. Like I think
Mhm.
he's really solid. Elijah Surratt, is he a Big Ten level receiver? I don't know, but he had like 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns or almost 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns. So yeah, and the 2 transfers you mentioned, I like both those players too. So there's a lot to like about the skill positions. You go the offensive line, 124 career starts between the starting 5. That is a lot of experience.
Yeah.
Um,
Bad experience, but at least you have experience. They've sucked
yeah,
together.
yes, exactly. But I mean, they I don't know. I like the Tyler Stevens kid they were able to bring in from James Madison too. Like he could play anywhere on the offensive line. I think he's a much better player than like people would assume. So I think their tackle spots are like pretty solid. I don't know. I like Carter Smith some. But he was like a first year starter last year. So like he was a true freshman. So I think he'll improve too. Yeah, there's a lot to like. So I'm looking at this. I'm like, you got 3 wins to me on the schedule: FIU, Western Illinois, Charlotte. You only got
Mhm.
to find 3 others. UCLA, like that's not that challenging in my opinion. So
No.
yeah, I like the over, and I'm not even like super bullish on Indiana, but I think enough things line up. I just need Curtis Rourke to stay healthy because I don't think Taven Jackson is that guy behind him,
Yeah. I
even
mean,
though he
look,
was a high end
again,
recruit.
it's the expectation is very low with this team, and I think that Indiana is building upwards, where teams like Washington and UCLA, who are on the schedule, are potentially trending downwards. That I just think there's a lot to like here, especially these like 1 year turnarounds. The floor's so low to just get over this. So Indiana's a flag plant team for me. I think that this team could be really good. Again, guys at James Madison now who are used to success. They are winners. I know you're making the jump from the Sun Belt to the Big Ten, but I think Signetti, I believe in him to maybe, get this team to a bowl game. I think that's something you can rally the team around as well when we get closer to the end of the year. Like maybe they're at 5 and they host Purdue to end the year. Rivalry game. Let's go to a bowl game. Let's do that. So I like that.
It would
Maryland.
not surprise me either, um, if their defense made a significant jump. Um,
Their
like
defense was good last year. Not better than maybe their record would state.
I think it was better when looking or accounting for uh points per opportunity. I think on the margins they lacked being able to get home to create havoc on both ends, right? So I think the defensive line is going to be a strength on this unit or for this team, and I'm not sure I felt that way because I think you're bringing in, or maybe the whole front 7, I should say, right? Like I like Jalen Walker and I like James Carpenter a lot. Like I think those are really big um additions from James Madison. So I don't know. I like this team too. I think the front 7's could be pretty good.
Yeah. Let's do Maryland because I think this is an interesting team. I think in the middle of this Big Ten, win total 6.5, shade towards the over -134. MJ Morris transfers in from NC State. Billy Edwards is still there. A lot of spring buzz for Nolan Ray, maybe eating into Roman Hemby's time at running back, really explosive running back. Leading receiver Felton is back. Offensive line was a question mark. We'll see how Josh Gash responds to not having Talia Tagovailoa. The defense, elite rush defense, but they do lose their top 2 tacklers. Was relying on turnovers, 29th in turnovers gained. Chris, I think I saw you tweet something about Maryland. So we're buying or selling the Terps.
I so their total opened at 7.5, and that was way too high. That was like at least a win too high. Got bet down pretty quick, 6.5, right? It's juiced towards the over. I don't know if I like that. To be honest, and I'm sure you do it very, very similarly. So I'm more speaking to the people, right? When projecting games, the spread is essentially like can be converted into a implied probability of winning. So when I look at Maryland and the work that I've done for their schedule and projecting each win, I project them to win 5.9 games, and only one game that I project them to win is above a 70% chance implied probability, and that is UConn. That's a lot of variance and like negative variance for Maryland. I don't like their quarterback. I don't like Billy Edwards at all. Like, I don't think he's a good quarterback. I liked what I saw from MJ Morris 2 years ago. I have no idea what MJ Morris is going to be in this offense. It doesn't sound like he's going to be a starter. It sounds like Edwards is. They don't return any offensive line starters. Their left guard does have some starting experience, Kyle Long, but still, only one projected starter has double-digit starts in his career. I like the left tackle they brought in, Alan Heron. He's a kid from Shorter, and he had a lot of big offers. I actually think Maryland getting him was a big deal. But man, he has no starting experience at the FBS level, and like Shorter's D2. We're not even talking FCS. Don't like their skill positions all that much. Like Roman Heavy's fine, but like Caden Prather is probably the best receiver on this team, and he has not taken the steps since breaking out at West Virginia. So I don't like this offense really at all. I think it could be really bad, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's one where I have their win total projected at 5.6, but I then
within a third of a win. There you go.
Yeah, but then it's one where like the number is 5.6, and then I look at the schedule and I'm like you could really sell me on like them getting to 7 pretty, you know what I mean? Like the coin flippies are like kind of, that gives you a little insight into how I project some of the Big Ten, but it's just tough to see 6. It's tough to go over 6.5 shaded. I can see why. Well, I definitely see why I went from under 7.5 to 6.5, but I could see why the over is still the preferred side, given some of the coin tosses are right now, they will be favored in them. You know, if you go through the schedule, and there aren't a lot of surefire losses on the schedule to make it like that unappealing.
So the UConn is the only game that I have them favored over a touchdown. That's it. And I have them favored like 6 or 7 games.
You have Villanova within a touchdown?
Yeah, I think Villanova's a pretty good FCS team. But I probably need to go back and look at that number again. But like, I kind of like Villanova, just saying. Even though like, I'm just like, it's not really that competitive of a team where you're going to blow people out. So yeah, I have them favored in more games than I project them to win, like by a lot. And I just don't like this.
It's more that like they're small favorites, so the likelihood of them losing are just higher. But it's like, can I actually pull the trigger on them losing those games? That's where I get concerned. Where can they finish like a shitty 7-5? Like, yeah, like it's not like some like foregone. Like we're like Washington finishing 7-5. I just don't see that as likely, even though they have an easier schedule. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I just don't see the path to 7.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean,
it's just hard for me to get there, I guess. By the way, I have that Villanova number 6.3.
Wow.
My number is like Villanova. Well, we don't need to get into the weeds of FCS, but I watch a lot of FCS football.
as we hit hour 50 on this pod. So Northwestern, anyway, 5.5 win total, minus 210 to the under at FanDuel. So really not giving them any chance of returning to a bowl game. We know they overachieved with the Fitzgerald Braun situation. They do bring in, I think, an interesting hire. And Chris, you're saying FCS. It's they bring in Zach Lejeune from South Dakota State. They're top 30 in returning production on defense. Was last year such a fluke in the upside that like they kind of crashed back down to earth, or are the vibes kind of here now for Northwestern to be frisky yet again for a second straight year?
I think last year was just so like of all the range of outcomes that Northwestern had last year, that was like the 99th percentile, right? Like I can't imagine them having a better season than they had last year, just from the win loss perspective. Um, on the field, I didn't think they were particularly good. Their defense was all right, but I kind of expected that from Northwestern. I think they've made a significant upgrade at quarterback. I like Mike Wright. I know Mike Wright probably we're talking 2 years ago now, 3 years ago now, was pretty dynamic. I think he's good. Like I think he could be
He
like
could be
at least
dropping
an upgrade over.
competition.
Yeah, I just like the way that he fits this offense, which is going to be run heavy. Having a mobile quarterback there is certainly helpful. He's better than Sullivan was. He's better than Helinski is. I like that hire. And they return enough, or that transfer. They return enough production on offense to feel good. They return a lot of production on defense, and that defense I thought was really solid last year, just in general. Um, the biggest question that I have is: are there enough skill position players to actually score points? Like Mike Wright can't do it all, and I like Mike Wright, but like I know Mike Wright is still a limited player. I think the answer is probably not. But I have a tough time projecting Northwestern at this point because what they did last year was so far outside of my expectation that I'm like, well, maybe they just are like really well coached.
Yeah, like maybe they are just a good team, and maybe they are a team that can just like almost like Iowa kind of, where like they win games they probably shouldn't. The schedule features a ton of coin flips. You know, Miami, Ohio, week 1 wouldn't shock me if that's a loss. Duke at home, who knows? Eastern Illinois, that's going to be a win. They go to Washington, who knows? Host Indiana, who knows? At Purdue, who knows? Illinois at home, who knows? You know, there are a lot of games. Even Friday night at Maryland, who knows? You know, there's a lot of coin flips here where it's probably, given the number, might be the more prudent decision to go over, just given, if you're trying to bet every win total, which I'm not advising to do, but I'm kind of a stay away here in terms of Northwestern, their win total.
You go. So there's a 4.5 out there at 130, which is probably. I don't want to say. I think I lean over that 4.5, but I certainly lean under the 5.5. That's out there. It's an interesting number because it's fluctuated a lot too.
Yeah.
It opened at 5.5.
Mm-hmm.
So
some books are just like a little quicker to just like move it the full win.
So some teams, that like I have them favored against Miami and Duke, and like you said, I think they could lose both them. Like Miami, Ohio is if they're not like the second best team in the back, they're the third. Like they're really good defense. Just a lot of coin flips. A lot of coin flips on the schedule, especially in games where they're favored, and that's the concern, right? In games where they're underdogs, like I have them as significant underdogs. Iowa, I don't have particularly close. Washington is over a touchdown, but maybe that shouldn't be the case. Northwest is gonna be a weird team. We're gonna see what they I think really are this year. Like if they're just a really well coached team that plays to their absolute ceiling, or if they're just caught lightning in a bottle.
Okay, so same question from Michigan State then. Jonathan Smith comes from the West Coast, brings Aiden Childs with him. I guess I'll just phrase it like this. Is this year 0 or is it year 1?
I think it's what is the expectation for year 1 is probably the question, right? Is the expectation bowling? Because if it is, then I don't think this is a team going bowling. I just don't see 6 wins. I can get to 5. Like I could sell myself on 5. I just don't see 6. I think it's a good combo, right? But like who are the weapons on this offense? Like I don't think Torrey Foster is very good. I don't like Jaron Glover, Alante Brown, Antonio Gates Jr. I don't think those receivers are Big Ten like starter level receivers. Foster probably is. Like a lot of the teams in the Big Ten, I think their tight ends the best weapon. Like
Yeah.
Jack Failing's a good player. Like how advanced is Childs as a passer? I like Aiden Childs long term, but like, still don't really know. The offensive line is kind of a question too, right? How good are these transfers? Bringing Tanner Miller over from Oregon State and keeping him with Jonathan Smith was big. But the Luke Newman kid that comes in from Holy Cross, like he's going to run a really different offense than they ran at Holy Cross. Like, what is the expectation there? Like, can he play at this high of a level, even though he's like an all conference? I don't even remember what division Holy Cross is in, but he was an all conference level player. Michigan State, I think I can get to 5. I can't get to 6. That's basically where I sit with them. And I would lean under 2. Like it's hard. I just don't like the skill positions on offense.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see if Aiden Childs is that good. Again, the expectation is so low, and it's why I'm a little always nervous. Obviously, dependent. I'm a little nervous on these like under really low numbers, just because of you don't need much to get over, right? Like one fluke game goes your way, all of a sudden, like you're pretty much you become like minus 300 to go over now. You know what I mean? Like you change the whole trajectory of the entire win total. Whereas like if your win total 6.5 or 7.5, you have much less room for error. The upset win, the one where you flip it, doesn't necessarily mean as much. So that's why I'm always a little nervous once we get to the bottom here in terms of going under on these. I do agree with you, though. There is a lot lacking here in the defense. We'll see what Rossi could do for Minnesota, but it is really lacking a lot of talent. I think it's going to take quite a bit to get this on track. But they do have a quarterback at least where maybe he pops off and he can win you a game that maybe you aren't expected to. Maybe it's Rutgers at the end of the year, or it's at Boston College, who has a shaky-ish defense, something like that, where that's why I'm maybe a little bit more bullish on the over. I also like Jonathan Smith as a coach, but I will say I do think Sparty might be a play on for me through conference play. If in terms of just like ATS, just team that can really run the rock. You have a dynamic quarterback in Aiden Childs. Jonathan Smith tries to slow the game down. I don't have the ATS numbers up in front of me, but he's a really good coach against the spread from Oregon State. Maybe he's just like a little bit stickier, and this Michigan State team isn't like threatening to win, but they cover double-digit spreads.
Yeah, I can certainly see that, right? Like he had a top 13 offense, both in success rate and EPA per play last year, and that was with DJU under center.
Yeah,
like his offense isn't like tricky or gimmicky or anything either. He just runs like a pro spread. He's just really smart, and good at scheming players up in that offense. So I think I would take the over 4.5 that is on FanDuel. It's heavily juiced. What is it? 150 minus
154.
Yeah, I think I would take that because I have them favored in 5 games, and I can sell myself on, like 5 being that number. I think 5 is probably the most likely range of outcomes. I think 4 would be a disappointment, and I don't see them getting to 6.
Yeah.
So it's like 5.5. I certainly would not approach, but I think the market's come down from there for the most part.
And you can find Bet365 as a minus 130 at 4.5. So that's a little bit more. You could stomach that a little bit better. But I agree with you. I think again, just like the expectation is just like way different for a team at this stage versus another state. At like again, I keep going back to Washington, UCLA. Like there's a lot more questions there and a lot less room for error. Where Michigan State, like you can get smoked by a few of these teams and still go over your win total. It doesn't really matter. You don't have to be so good to win 5 games.
Yeah, exactly. 4.5 or 130 is a good number. I actually don't think the defense is all that bad either. Like I think it's a stronger unit than the offense is. I think their linebacker duo is really, really good. So it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see how they adapt because Jordan Turner was a transfer from Oregon State, and is he physical enough and big enough to be a factor in for that linebacking core? So yeah, I think there's a lot of questions. Obviously, year one, but 4.5 is a low number based on who they play.
Yeah, Ed Woods from Arizona State. He's transferring over. He has starting experience in the secondary. The secondary got cooked over the top plenty of times, but I think that also had to do with they kind of gave up on the season and it got just
Yeah.
no discipline whatsoever. But again, you go through the schedule: host Florida Atlantic, host Prairie View A&M, you host Purdue on a Friday. That's 3 already. Host Indiana, you're going to be favored. That's 4. And then you have like at Illinois, at Maryland, at BC. You steal one of those. What 5th game do you have in favor versus Rutgers?
I have them favored against Rutgers. I have them favored against Purdue, FAU, Prairie View, and
And
Indiana.
Indiana.
But
And then also
the
you have winnable
Indiana
games
number
like at
is
Illinois.
short. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I have Illinois within a field goal, right? So
Yeah.
like, I think they can win. I have Boston College favored, but like I think they can beat Boston College.
Yeah.
Like I think there's enough there where even if they don't win the games I have favored, like they can sneak one out that I think they're underdogs in.
Yeah. And we close it out with Purdue, 4.5, shade towards the under, -178 at FanDuel. I mean, look, like we could talk about the team and project, what Hudson Card could do, what this aggressive man defense that got cooked last year can do. I think point blank, the schedule is just way too difficult to really get like an honest assessment on what Purdue's going to be this year. I have them favored against Indiana State, Northwestern, and that's it. And they do like the same thing as UCLA, where they play in week 1, they get a bye, and then it's back-to-back groups of 6 on their schedule. They have to play Oregon, at Ohio State, Penn State, and then Notre Dame in the non-con. That's not fun. They go to Wisconsin and to Illinois back-to-back weeks. I think, look, like we could go through the roster, but I mean, do you see much upside here? I think there's not enough talent, and the schedule is too brutal.
It really depends how you feel about Indiana and Illinois. Probably is where you land on this, right? So like I have Purdue favored against Indiana, and I don't think I would take them. Like I think that's a blind spot in my numbers, just
Yes.
considering how much Indiana's turning over, right? I don't like the offense. Where is the difference maker on offense? Like they lost Deion Burks to Oklahoma. That would have been him. On defense, I think you maybe have like 2 game breakers, right? And Purdue's a tough team to really like. I think their defense is a lot better than their offense is, but like I don't think their offense has any players that can help them keep up in like high scoring games. So
Losing
like,
Burks is a killer. That hurts because like
and it wasn't even just his production;
he
he
was
just opened the whole offense.
yeah he was like far and away the best player on the team. Like he was just moving at like a
Big time.
different speed than everyone else on the team. So that is a pretty massive loss for a team like this. So again, like we could go back and forth. I don't think there's much to say. I think the team just kind of got the shit end of the stick where it comes to a schedule where you can't really build up. It's kind of more just like survive and get on to next year.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. There are toss-up games that make me say, well, like I don't have a confident lean on their win total, just because I think they play some games where I'm like, well, yeah, I can see them. Like, I think they play 6 or 7 legit toss-up games. Like my numbers kind of like Purdue a little bit, but that's a lot of that is the defense, and I don't know if that's a good matchup or not for some of these schools where they're tight.
Yeah.
Either tight favorites or close dogs. So I don't know.
Okay. 2 hours in the books. You're a hero for coming on, Chris. I appreciate it. I wanted though to bring up some fantasy guys, and like some teams I may have like overlooked that and I glossed over, but I hope we were able to shine your light and your expertise in terms of how much you know about these player by player evaluations. So as we recap some of the bets we like, some of the, please also share, some of the fantasy takes you have on this conference as well. If there's like maybe something we overlooked, maybe there's a unit you're really eyeing, please, by all means, because I really do appreciate the time.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm always happy to talk about it. Right, we did the Big Ten last year and run it back, and I finally wrapped up, like I was saying at the beginning, my my evaluation and a lot of my preseason progress. So it's nice to bounce it off of somebody too who is in the
Mm,
same boat and just kind of get the same thoughts. And I think we're aligned on a lot of teams, but I think there's some spots where we see things differently, which will be pretty interesting to see how they play out. But I mean, just in general, this you're going to get so much fantasy production from this conference. Like the high end guys are the high end guys, and I think there's a lot of players on each team that are really interesting. Even the teams that are awful, right? Like Illinois, I don't expect to be very competitive, but like I love the running back Caden Fegan. Like I think he's going to
mm.
be productive, right? So each team is unique in that own way. So like that's part of why I like this so much, right? Like there is the team evaluation and there's the player evaluation. I think is just fun.
Yeah. So any other guys besides the Illinois running back that you're kind of targeting in terms of fantasy, or that maybe there's like you could maybe like slide in a hidden gem for us or something like that?
Ooh, a hidden gem. That would be. I brought him up earlier. I think he's really underrated. Michigan State's tight end Jack Failing transferred in from Oregon State. I
Oregon
think could
State.
have a really really productive year. Um, One, because I think he's the best passing weapon in that entire offense, and two, I just think he's a good player. He goes late in drafts too. I think he's a good value.
Okay, love it. And then any other bets, win totals? I know we went back, but just in case anyone wants to fast forward and get the bets and not listen to us ramble, any other bets from this conference?
Um, you know what was one that was interesting to me that I hadn't seen before. And hold on, let me make sure I get the odds right on this. Uh, FanDuel has this Heisman Trophy specials. And we talked about this player in the Heisman race, and that was Dylan Gabriel. And it's Dylan Gabriel and Oregon to win the national championship. And that's 44 to 1. I think that's kind of interesting because I think Oregon State is good. Oregon's good enough team to win the national championship. And like compared to where you're sitting with like Carson Beck at like 19 to 1, those are some interesting odds. So I know we talked about a lot of win total specific to teams, but that's something that I have not explored the market of quite yet. And that number just feels really good when you compare it to someone like Ohio State and Will Howard, who's 35 to 1. So you're getting 44 to 1. And I think similar team, not quite as talented, Will Howard. And I think there's a case that other players in Ohio State are going to possibly cut into that, especially if they do the Chip Kelly thing where we see running backs do take a bigger part of the offense compared to where Ryan Day was. So I like that. I like that number. I think that number is really interesting, and it's not a market that I've really ever explored before, but one that I think you could get a little bit of value in for sure.